So now it's time to introduce our esteemed panelists that you signed up to actually hear today. They're ready to share their time and expertise with this community, so let's get to it. First off, our moderator, Monica Davy. Monica is the Chief Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer at Vizient, the nation's leading healthcare performance improvement company with 4,000 employees in 20 metropolitan areas across the United States. Monica guides Vizient's overarching strategy, program implementation, and provides ongoing support for the company's culture and D&I initiatives. Yay, Monica. Nupur Bhushan is General Manager for the ResMed business in Australia and New Zealand. Prior to this role, Nupur was the Global Chief People Officer responsible for aligning people and corporate strategies across ResMedians in over 100 countries for 4 years. She is a leader with over 20 years of diverse experience across multiple geographies and cultures, with a focus on building and transforming organizational capability to deliver business.
Sherry, you went on mute.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I love when women just tell me what's up. Alessandra Lezama is the founder and CEO of TOOTRiS, Childcare on Demand, a technology platform that is reinventing how parents find, enroll, and pay for quality childcare. With over 20 years as a technology executive and serial entrepreneur, Alessandra is passionate about supporting women in the workplace and as business owners. Lezama's hands-on leadership across industries has earned her a reputation as a rainmaker. She was recently named 2020 Businesswoman of the Year and 2021 Moving San Diego Forward Award. Welcome, Alessandra. And Mimi Liu is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion with Thermo Fisher Scientific, a world leader in serving science with global team of 80,000 colleagues. Wow. As a part of the D&I Center of Excellence, Mimi serves as the global leader for Thermo Fisher's business and employee resource groups and works with partners and key stakeholders across the company to develop and align programs that cultivate and advance Thermo Fisher's global D&I strategy. Welcome back, Mimi. And Antonia Luna serves as the Senior Vice President of Branch Network and Support Services at California Coast Credit Union, where she is responsible for strategic direction, growth, member experience, delivery channels, and operational excellence. A strong champion of the credit union movement and dedicated to helping shape the future of the credit union industry throughout DEI. Antonia is the co-chair of the Global Women's Leadership Network in San Antonio and Riverside Sister Society, among other active volunteer roles. Thank you for joining us today, Antonia. And with that, it is my honor and privilege to turn the program over to you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you all for joining us today. I am so pumped about this conversation. Just to get to spend a couple of hours, a little under 2 hours, talking to other women about their journeys and sharing her stories. I love this. Picture us around a fireside. Excuse the fact that we have to be virtual. Picture us around a fireside or on a stage in a semicircle, just having a conversation. And we're just gonna have a conversation today. So without further ado, let's jump in. I'm excited to have this conversation, so I don't want to spend a lot of time with introductory small talk. We're going to jump right into the questions. Everybody ready? All right. So as you think about your career and how far you've come, we all have this moment that kind of defined or changed the trajectory of our career. For me, it was when I worked at the Food and Drug Administration. I applied for a job, an executive job, pretty quickly. I was acting in the role. I didn't even get an interview. I felt that changed the trajectory of my career because it made me make sure I was prepared the next time, presented myself differently, right? So I know that's kind of a negative thing that changed the trajectory of my career. But I want you guys to share today, what do you feel like changed the trajectory of your career or propelled you to where you are today? I want everybody to share, but we're going to start with Mimi and then we're going to move on to Nupur. So Mimi, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks so much, Monica. And thank you to Sherry and Danielle and the entire team at the Center for Executive Excellence for hosting these important conversations. I will tell you, I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. I took a very non-traditional, linear role to where I am today. But I will remember one of my more memorable achievements is being able to conceptualize and launch a broadband adoption program for families of low income to get access to the internet, right? Something we've taken completely for granted in this COVID-ridden world. The program became an industry standard for closing the digital divide, and we actually got a shout out from President Obama at the time. But at that time, I was asked to partner with my boss to take a meeting with an external partner on how to even create and start this program. I remember my boss had a conflict on her calendar and opted not to go to this one. I said, I think this one's an important one not to miss. I remember telling her that. And I was so extremely frustrated when she didn't see the sense of urgency for this meeting. And I was pretty junior in my role, but I decided to take that meeting alone, ended up with a great conversation and an opportunity to build a program from scratch. That program gave me so much visibility within my company, my industry, as well as my community, and all my friends from Cox can attest to this. It really propels me to leadership opportunities that I still credit to today. Lesson learned for me is never pass up an opportunity to stretch, do your homework, and be ready when that opportunity knocks. What may seem like extra work could end up being your ticket to so much more. So again, when that opportunity knocks, I say work your butt off. Work your butt off to make sure you can show your potential and your impact.
I love that. Stretch, homework, be ready, which is what I did not do when I applied for that position. So thank you for that lesson. Nupur, we're going to move on to you.
Thanks, Monica, and thanks for having me too. Very inspiring story, Mimi. It's obviously over 20 years in my career, there have been many moments which have probably influenced the trajectory of my career. I have probably two stories to share. One relatively negative and one slightly more positive. So I'm Indian origin and moved to Australia about 15 odd years ago. And, while the move to Australia was really exhilarating, it was quite complex. At the time in the organization I was working, I was the only woman of color in the HR team. And there was this particular individual who seemed to deliberately exclude me from the simplest of things at every company event, even something like a morning tea or an afternoon tea where the team would get together. And I just had this really firm resolve that I am going to establish myself as a really respected leader in my field, in this organization, and I did. So the challenge of proving myself and really standing up for myself was something that I learned through that experience, and I proved that I could do it. On a more positive note, over the last 4 or 5 months, I've actually really moved in my career from being an HR professional for over 20 years into a commercial leader role. So I head up the P&L for our Australia New Zealand business, as Sherry said in the introduction. And it is a big move, moving from a global chief people officer role to a P&L leader role. And I'm quite fortunate, or rather ResMed is very fortunate. We have an amazing board of directors, some really wonderful women as a part of that board of directors. And their advice has constantly been to women leaders in the company to really get out of our comfort zone and try something new and back ourselves. So it was actually one of a similar panel discussion with our women board of directors, where I heard one of them speak and talk about the importance of probably running a business and how it gains credibility and so on and so forth for the individual. So it really helped me, and I actually put up my hand about 6 months ago for the role, and was very grateful for the opportunity, was selected for the role, hope I do well. I'm determined to prove myself in it. So that's a bit more positive story at my end.
Thank you. Taking the risk and raising your hand. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to move on to Alessandra, but before you share, Alessandra, I want you to tell us your full name.
All right, so hello to everyone. First and most importantly, I'm delighted to be here. Love sharing this incredible panel with extraordinary women. So icebreaker, true story, it took me until the 3rd grade to learn how to spell my name, and here's why. My full name is Alessandra Maria Vittoria Lezama Romani Giovanetti Capelletti Negrini di Giacomo. So how's that for a challenge? Love it. Obviously, my license does not have all my names, but love the conversation. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Love the first question. It goes straight to my heart. And the reason for that is, you know, one of my favorite stories started out very early in my career. So I was cherry picked out of my MBA overseas to work for a technology conglomerate, right? Alcatel Telecom, no bigger telecom company, right? And so I thought I was hot stuff, and I had a big corner office across the way from, you know, the VP that had hired me, Jerry Allen, to this day, one of my biggest mentors. And for the first 6 months, I was out to prove that he had made the best decision in his life. I was first in the office. I was last to lock up. I wanted to make sure that he saw me busy running around, engaging with everyone, busy, busy, busy. I was just so excited to have that position. And when 6 months came and went, and I came in for my first review, I kind of, you know, sat back in my chair and I said, all right, Jerry, you know, give it to me, with a big smile. And I was pumped. And he sat in his chair, took a sip of his coffee, and very seriously said, Alessandra, I think I made a mistake thinking that you were ready for that role. And I thought he was joking. So I kind of chuckled. I said, oh, come on, Jerry, you can't be serious. And all of a sudden, I realized he was not joking. He was deadly serious. And so it was like a bucket of cold water over me. And, you know, it's a long story, but primarily what he shared with me was that he was terribly disappointed because he felt that I was just too busy, too much, all of the time, sort of speak. And from his perspective, he had hired me. He had seen in me a unique characteristic to be a, you know, change maker, an agent of change. And he was just very bewildered at how I could ever know, right, where the issues and the challenges lied and where the opportunities for change were when I was so busy doing. He called it the hamster wheel. And to this day, I catch myself often, right, wanting to fall in that hamster wheel where you're working so hard and you're going so quickly and you're just doing. And then you wonder why you're not getting ahead. And the reason that you're not getting ahead is because you got to jump out of that hamster wheel. You got to stop. You got to take steps back. You got to think. You got to ponder. And you've got to listen. And so the lesson there was thinking is hard work. And most people get lazy in just going with the flow and getting into a pattern and then wonder why they're not getting ahead. So getting ahead is a purposeful act that takes introspective thought, and it takes time and hard work to think, plan, right, review, and fine tune. So ultimately, that was a lesson that I've carried through my entire life in my career. I have one day a week where I just don't book appointments. I don't book myself any kind of activity other than strategic, you know, thought. And so recently I saw a video by Warren Buffett, and I don't know if you all seen it, but it's fabulous. They are having a discussion on a panel, and he says, you know, for those of you that haven't really thought about, for those of you that think that it's a good thing to be busy, I got something coming for you. Busy is the new stupid, right? Because that's like quote Warren Buffett, right? So the reality of it is it's easy to just throw ourselves into our work, and sometimes we do need to pause and ponder, take 3 steps back, stop, listen, and think. So that's kind of my story.
I love that, Alessandra. Busy is the new stupid. Love, love, love. I had a similar story. I was in a leadership development course once, and by day 2 of a 4-day course, the instructor came down, got on his knee, sat next to my chair, and said, duct tape. Told me, quiet, be a little more quiet and listen more, right? So I love that, being intentional about planning, stopping, listening. Love that, love that. Antonia, welcome.
Thank you
Welcome.
so much. I'm so excited to be on this panel, and wow, fascinating stories already from these 3 fantastic women. This is great to hear. And you know, it's interesting. I had so many similar things happen to me, but I will tell you that I actually started my career as a 19-year-old single mom. And so I was not, you know, no one came to me and said, hey, you have these great opportunities. In fact, I was counted out and looked at like somebody that wasn't really going to make it as far as I have. And so I worked pretty hard and was advocating for myself a lot. So I had a lot of intrinsic motivation, and I wanted to learn everything I could learn. And I just said, put me in coach everywhere I could go. I want to learn, show me this department, teach me this. And then I got to a point where I knew I was ready for something else, and there wasn't an opportunity where I currently was. So I really took a chance on myself and applied for a position that I was not qualified for, that I did not have any experience with, but I said, guys do it all the time, so I'm going to do it too. And I did, and I applied for a management position inside of Washington Mutual, and I got accepted. And I'll never forget the manager that hired me. I asked her later, why did you hire me? Like I wasn't ready for that. I didn't have the experience. And she said, you didn't need the experience. What you showed in your interview was a can-do attitude, intrinsic motivation, a willingness to learn. And, you know, that really taught me a lot. And that's something that I've always carried with me, is just advocate for yourself, never be afraid to learn, stretch out of your comfort zone, and just go for it. And that's what happened with me. And it's been great.
Go for it. All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. All right. So I'm going to move on to the next question. And post-COVID, I know every single person, participants, as well as panelists, we're all having these conversations in our workplaces, right? What are we going to do post-COVID? What's going to be the return to work model? We know that COVID has changed everything in the landscape, and it has also amplified the need for flexibility. I know that at my workplace, at Vizient, we're talking about, you know, if you give people the option of whether to be virtual or to come in, I raise this issue. What's the impact going to be to women, right? When we think about the fact that relationships in many of our organizational cultures are critical, right? Those conversations at the water cooler, forming those relationships, being seen, that's critical to advancing. So let's be thoughtful. If we make this decision that we're going to leave it up to people, and then in a traditional sense, there are more women who have those at-home responsibilities, because we still haven't broken away from that in many instances, let's be real, that many women may make the choice to work from home, while men, this is stereotype, I know, make the choice of going in. And what's the impact to our career growth if that's the choice that we're making, right? So that's the conversation I'm having in my company. But for you guys, what are some workplace flexibility policies or practices that you believe companies should take action on to support women and accelerate progress in closing the gender gap in the workplace? And I'm going to start with Alessandra.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't agree with you more about the place of women and how important and critical it is to get us all back into the workforce and help us thrive. But you know what you say about men, you know, not traditionally being those that stay at home, that's documented. I mean, research will tell you that 90% of the time when a husband, wife sit down at the table, make a decision to, you know, stay at home and care for kids, women are more prone to make that decision or drop out or, you know, reduce the hours of work. So just months before the pandemic hit, women had crossed a major threshold as we became the majority of job holders in the US. However, since then, just for, you know, stats here, nearly 3 million American women have left the workforce, primarily because of childcare demands and just family support issues. And, you know, just to kind of plant the seed, when women leave the workforce, family income is not just impacted by the annual salary. That carries on for life. If you take in account everything that you know revolves around the family economy, when a woman leaves the workforce, that family income is impacted 4 times by the annual salary that was lost due to the woman dropping out. So it's such a huge issue. And while, yes, there's been a lot of discussion, and thanks to, you know, technology, now there's a lot of women that are able to work remote, just, you know, working parents at large. The reality of it is that even when we're working at home, we can't, you know, juggle all the responsibilities of, you know, motherhood and you know, just recently being, you know, at home, you know, teachers and just doing it all. So truly, the key to helping women in the workforce is to provide better family support services, starting with childcare, because there is no, you know, higher priorities that we have than, you know, to ensure that our family unit is strong, and it starts with our children. So employers now and our elected officials and just communities at large, I think, have recognized through this pandemic how key childcare and family support services are. And so now it really becomes imperative for employers to step up in order to re-engage and help women thrive in their careers and help them, you know, thrive and sit on boards and get into management positions, which has, you know, research has shown that companies that have more women in the workforce and sitting on boards are highly productive and more profitable than not, right? In order to do that, employers have to step up and truly support those family issues that women need to have in a good place so that they can have peace of mind to focus and engage in their careers. So, you know, from my perspective, I truly believe that in order to close that gender gap, we need to focus on what women need to get out of the house, to have peace of mind, and that when they're in the workforce, right, obviously they have the support of, you know, male executives, which I'm sure we're going to touch on later.
All right. Thank you, Alessandra. I appreciate that. Antonia.
Alessandra, I have to agree with your impassioned response about supporting working moms, because I think that's an extremely valid point. And, you know, everyone has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but for us women, it's really highlighted the inequities between, you know, working at home, and it shows the inequalities, I would say, of the what we have to do as far as working double shifts. So let me just say that. So working moms, right? We've always had to kind of work that double shift where you have a full day in the office and then you come home and you have a take care of your family at home as well. And as Alessandra said, over 3 million women had to exit the workforce in the past year because they found themselves with school closures and having to work a double, triple shift and having to educate their children, or even having to take care of aging parents. So the choice that moms had to make between showing up for their jobs or caring for their families was a difficult one. And so I think, you know, as we're emerging from this, policies such as flexible work schedules, hybrid remote options are important to consider, but also having that conversation about unconscious bias, like the conversations that you're having, Monica, about in your company, about how does this affect women? I think that's an important one to have. And then also kind of shifting our mindset from focusing on time spent in the office as, you know, kind of assessing a worker's performance, to really assessing their performance on their delivery and their achievements, regardless of the time that they're spending in the office. I think that would help create some of that awareness and help close that gap.
Great, great advice. Thank you for sharing that, Antonia. Nupur.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Alessandra as well as Antonia. I do though think that, we have to find a way to get male leaders much more involved in the conversation. And what we have tried in our organization, and in part successfully, where we have male leaders actually sharing some of their stories around what are they picking up at home and how are they helping with kids or household chores, etc. Because I think it goes a long way in destigmatizing the issue, really encouraging people to, it's like men stepping out of their comfort zone, if I may put it that way, right? And if you see peer male leaders or your bosses, let's say, talk about it openly, it encourages others to follow suit, probably. And I think there are also other issues around, the workplace, especially in some of the Western countries. I see this much more, that there is a big stigma around actually taking time off and really switching off. And somehow we've got to encourage the conversation around, role modeling time off, encouraging people to take some time off for themselves. It's okay to focus on one's own well-being, one's own family. It's nothing wrong. We're all human. We all need to do it. So having some more open conversation and dialogue about it, I think goes a long way in supporting women, definitely, and the entire workforce. If we're talking about inclusivity, it's all genders that need the support in the current times, I think.
I love that, and I think it's key when we get our male leaders modeling this behavior. I got to go to the baseball game. I got to pick up from school. I got to take off because my kid is sick, right? The more that we have men in leadership positions doing this, it will remove the stigma. I love that. All right, Mimi, did you want to add?
I'm sure. I just so appreciate Nupur and Monica, you adding this piece about the role of men in all this too, right? So going back to your question in terms of what companies could do, I would just offer that you really keep that in mind as you think about your policies. We're not thinking about maternity leave, right? We're thinking about parental leave, that we embrace and we create opportunity where men can take on not just the occasional, let's help, the mom out type role, but I'm talking about all caretakers, talking about creating a society that really embraces men in the stay-at-home role. Right? So I think just changing that vernacular and really making that the norm is really important. And then from a workplace perspective, if companies aren't thinking about this, I'll say this is very practical, but I can tell you it was so amazing to have subsidy, equipment subsidy, some sort of work at home subsidy, because again, we're all coming from different places. Your employees are all at different places. Not everybody has that monitor at home, and I was so impressed with how companies were able to pivot into the COVID world so quickly. I would just ask that we think also now, if you do offer that flexible work at home, what are some of the practical things employees may need to be successful in? Tools have always been up there. So just something practical to think about.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. All right. So we're going to move on. Unless anybody else has anything to add, we'll move on to this next question. And this is one of these tough questions. In 2019, we had more than 180 CEOs that signed an open letter opposing state efforts to restrict reproductive rights in America, right? This is one of these hot issues that in my company, we're a healthcare company, but we're in Texas. We're kind of, tiptoeing our way into this. As of last month, more than 500 such restrictions have been introduced in the US so far in 2021. What role do you all think female leaders play in helping their C-suite executives navigate what we call this gray area of this highly divisive issue? And let's acknowledge up front, it's a very divisive issue. And I'm going to start with you, Alessandra.
Well, thank you. Personal values are the real crux of the controversy surrounding reproductive rights in America. And while we all have a right to our credence, the fact is that reproductive rights affect a woman's body. And this is not or should not be subject to be controlled by neither government nor foreign party. And again, this is very much, founded in my beliefs that, a woman's body is her own. So it's a very sensitive, topic to put our well-being, our right to make decisions over our own body, right, on the table for third parties to chime in and influence. So a women's leadership role, I believe, is key in magnifying our voice and garnering the support from men to women's right to decide over their own bodies, indistinctively to others' personal beliefs or values. I think that there's certainly room for perspectives and opinions and conversation, yet those should not be impactful of women's right to decide over their own body. So in sum, I just don't feel that government or third parties have a role to play in that decision.
All right. Mic drop there. I'm going to move on to Antonia.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, this is definitely a highly divisive issue, and I really applaud you guys for being willing to engage in this conversation and ask our opinions on this. And I just want to share that I did read the open letter, and while I agree, according to the open letter, it says we should stand against policies that hinder people's health, independence, and the ability to fully succeed in the workplace. I personally don't believe that employers should take a side on the abortion debate. I think that there's an implication in there that says that a woman's ability to be fully successful depends on her access to abortion, and that can actually be oppressive to many women. By taking a side, I think employers run the risk of marginalizing the working moms. And we just had a huge conversation around working moms. And the fact of it is that women can be very successful and they can have children. So I get that women choose abortion and reproductive rights for multiple personal reasons. And in my research, I found that some of those most common reasons are because they're saying that their pregnancy would interfere with their education, with their career, their ability to care for dependents, or even they would have financial struggle and not even being able to afford a baby. And honestly, that's where I think we need to be focused. I think we need to be focused on supporting pregnant women so that they can achieve their dreams, they can finish school, they can get promoted at work, they can have a successful career. I honestly think that women deserve better. And to Alessandra's point, I don't think that an employer, third party, or government should be involved in that.
Thank you, Antonia. So we see the diversity of perspectives. Nupur, would you like to chime in?
This is a really tough one, okay, because I'm not in the US, not in the thick of this debate, but I absolutely agree that a woman, it's my body, it's my right. I'm the one who should determine what's best suited for me. Why should any government or employer dictate policy on this, right? It's beyond comprehension for me, to be really honest here. But I think the question is also about how do we navigate sensitive, divisive issues from a gender equality perspective or equity perspective in the workplace, beyond just reproductive rights. I think it's really, even if I think at the beginning, Sherry said, everybody enter your pronouns on the Zoom chat, right? Or against your name. In my organization, that itself was such a sensitive topic to navigate, right? So we women leaders probably need to surface these issues and be willing to have a perspective, to understand employee perspective, understand best practice externally, bring that to the fore, have an open dialogue, debate it, and the organization to have a position on it. I think in the current times, it's important to have a position on it. So coming back to the issue you've raised, whether the employer has a say in it or not, I think an employer probably needs to have a position on whether they want to have a say in it and be quite open about it, and us navigating that conversation versus whether it's, right, it's a woman's right or not. I don't think that should be contentious at all.
Right.
That's just my perspective on it.
Yeah, and I think that's what's tough about this topic, right? We have most of our companies say that they stand for gender equality. And if you are in a position where you believe gender equality means a woman should have a right to choose what happens to her body, that's kind of like taking a position, right, Antonia? I mean, I think that's what's so complex about this issue, and how we probably find ourselves as we're advising the C-suite. You say you stand for gender equality, but not taking a stand on whether a woman has a right to make this choice. Is that taking a stand against gender equality? Right? I mean, Alessandra, is that how you see it?
Well, I just have a very black and white opinion on it. And I agree with most of what's been said here. And you're right, it's a very sticky subject. But the truth is that it's not up for debate whether women have a right to make decisions over their own body. We were born with that right, period, no differently than any other man. So that should not be the debate. I think the debate is, right, can and should governments and other third parties, right, have an impact on laws that can, right, set back and have a negative outcome to women's rights. And so from an employer standpoint, I don't think employers need to take a position on the debate. I think they need to take a position as to whether or not they are going to support the conversation at the corporate level, at their at their workforce level, and are they going to voice, right, their support for women's rights. I think it's really above and beyond just gender equality here. We're talking about a human right, period. A human right to decide over my own body. It just so happens that I'm a woman and I can bear children, and it just so happens that men can't scientifically, right? Biologically. So it really is a matter of, I believe, women elevating our voice, and especially if we are in a position of power, in a position where our voices are more prone to be heard. I believe that we should be elevating those, but I really don't even think that there's a debate, right? That the debate should exist.
So I think, Antonia, I think you want to chime in, and then Mimi, we'll go to you.
I just think that it's a super interesting conversation, and we could probably have a whole panel discussion on this, because when we talk about gender equality in the workplace, I think that's really important. And I think that, when we read this letter that was sent out, and the implication that a woman may not be as successful as a man just because she has the ability to bear children, when in reality, there's one thing to be said for gender equality and equal rights. And there's another thing to be what Alessandra just said, is that we're biologically different, right? Biologically, we can bear children and men can't. And so those are two things that should not inhibit any of us in the workplace, right? Because we're biologically different doesn't mean that we should be treated different in the workplace. And I think that's where our focus should be.
Yeah, thank you, Antonia. Mimi?
I agree. I think we need a whole nother session just on this. But I love where Nupur is going with this, because I think it's not only this particular issue, but every single company, regardless of your size, given this past year and a half, has had to deal with, do you take a stance or not, right? And I think what I would offer is, as a company, like Nupur said, you have to decide for yourself, what is your company identity and where do you take stance on issues and what matters to your colleagues, right? What's important is, do you have the space for a conversation where these issues can be elevated? And that's what we talked about is, do you have ERGs? Do you have forums where, hey, let's talk about working parents, let's talk about women issues. And then as a company, as a leadership team, I think those executives have to really be at the table and say, you know what, this is important to our colleagues. So let's consider, how do we react to this situation, the issue at hand, and not the statement or not statement, right? Every company has had to deal with, do I put something out on Black Lives Matter? Do I put something out on Asian hate? 5 years ago, Orlando, or I guess many more years ago, there's always going to be issues. What's more important to me, if it comes to supporting women, is think about your benefits, right? If you really truly believe in a woman's ability to choose, think about the benefits that you offer within your packages. How do you show support through that? I feel sorry for a lot of leaders right now who have had to deal with this head on. And I think it's an interesting time. It was necessary to put all of this at the forefront, but I think every company has to decide for itself, where do you take an issue, where do you take a public opinion, and where do you take an internal statement as well? And if you haven't been doing that, I would suggest that you really need decision trees, right? You need to come together as an organization and say, where am I going to stand up? Because my employees are expecting me to do so, the public is expecting me to do so, and investors are expecting me to do so. So it's really about the conversation. And so that's why I'm a little bit with Antonia on this one. Is neither here nor there, right? It's not about that, but to the first point, let's have a conversation.
And you know what, Mimi? I love your list of who's expecting you to take a stand, but you know who else? Your future employees,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
So those employees that you're trying to attract to your company, they want to see what kind of stand you're taking on this, right? There's all kind of research out there that says, especially younger generations, they expect their employers to take a stand on social issues, right? So let's migrate on to the next question, which is around social justice. This past year, we have seen so many conversations around the racial justice movement, starting with the murder of George Floyd, systemic barriers, systemic racism, all of that has come to a forefront. I describe systemic racism or institutional racism in the sense that there's no institution that's free of it, all right? In my opinion, in this country, we were built on certain principles, and that there's no institution that's protected from this issue. There's this concept called the concrete ceiling, and I think you're going to see a link to that in the chat. And it points to the factors of preventing women of color from advancing in the workplace, right? So this intersection between race and gender, I can tell you, this whole conversation about being a woman, trust you me, being a woman of color and a Black woman, it's a different story. That intersectionality between race and gender. And we all, as women, when we're in a meeting, we have to go through this, mental Olympics about what do I say it, not be too emotional about how I say it. Just imagine what it's like to be a woman of color, having to go through that. And I don't want to seem too angry. I don't want to seem too emotional, right? And all that you have to go through before you say something or how you present yourself. So I want us to start having a conversation about this. And in your experience or in your opinion, how can companies be more mindful of these hurdles that women of color have to face differently from their colleagues? And Antonia, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Well, the concrete ceiling concept, I think that's a really important visual and something that, I'm glad you guys asked this question because it gave me some time to really contemplate that. And the glass ceiling, right, which we're all familiar with, you could see through the glass ceiling. You could see the possibility. Maybe you can't get to it, but you could see it, but you can't see through concrete, right? So if women in color have that concrete ceiling, then they don't even get to see the possibility. And that's really something. And I think we need to have an open and honest dialogue about that in our workplaces. I think we need to talk about gender and race and the intersectionality. I think we need to talk about ethnicity, biases, microaggressions. I think we need to be really intentional about becoming allies for women of color, advocating for them behind closed doors, ensuring that they are, you know, valued for their efforts and speak up when we hear microaggressions at work. And I think, you know, we in our credit union have been doing a lot of training on that lately to really recognize those. And I think really important, another important aspect is that we have to normalize and encourage conversations about these women's ambitions, right? So that they don't have to, they can speak openly about their ambitions and be encouraged to do so and normalize that.
All right, thank you, Antonia. Mimi, you have something you want to share on that?
I do, and you touched on a lot of it, Monica. I think this question really underscores the importance of intersectionality, right? And I will offer, even though I am a woman of color, what I experience can't be generalized to all women of color. And as Monica said, she's a Black woman. You know, I can share that as an Asian immigrant woman from a very traditional Chinese family, these dimensions of my identity do impact my experience at work. And I think to get at this question, I want to think about two realities I think we need to acknowledge. One is the American workplace is often characterized by white and masculine standards of professionalism and qualifications, right? What I mean by that is from superficial things like attire or hairstyle. I once had a colleague who was told by an HR professional she needed to cut her hair shorter and wear more blazers just to look more professional and like a leader. I'm seeing all your faces. Totally absurd, right? But that was a true story. And then there are arbitrary things like how leaders must act and work. We've all heard, hey, so-and-so has so much executive presence, and we've gravitated towards that. I've done that. I've certainly, and we've seen so many trainings about the 7 skills of executive presence and all of this. But I would challenge us to think, what are we weighing when we say that? Are we truly considering their contributions? Or are we making an assessment based on societal stereotypes that have been implanted in our heads? Women in color in particular have had to work twice as hard, like Monica said, to fit this mold and disprove these myths about qualifications. So I think companies can be more mindful about who they glorify and what they personify as leadership qualities. So challenge that traditional look and feel of a leader will help us really be more objective about performance and potential. And then the second reality I think we need to acknowledge is the lack of representation makes it difficult for women of color to feel like they belong, right? And not seeing them in roles, and this applies to any underrepresented group, not seeing yourself in a company can really deter you from entering that. So any male-dominated industry can tell you how difficult it has been to recruit women and retain them. So that lack of diversity and representation also then reinforces these unfair stereotypes about who's qualified. So I'll give you an example. If we are accustomed to seeing female executive assistants, for example, are we more likely to think that men cannot do that job as well? Is that fair for men? Is that for women, right? You notice I'm really big on challenging these norms of roles, but I know many of us have heard, oh, I don't really see her in that role. Are those assessments really objective, or are they unconscious biases? And are we creating barriers of entry simply because we're comparing a candidate to a pool that didn't include their identity in the first place? So how does this lack of women in leadership or women of color in leadership somehow make them less qualified to some? So I think companies can be more intentional. Hiring is huge. Everybody talks about hiring, but I know we all agree developing and promoting diverse deserving women is really important. Have these objective measures of success. Don't put the burden on women to prove their potential simply because we haven't seen them in that role, and fight that tendency to go with what's familiar and know that when there's a lack of representation, those who are not represented don't have visibility into the group. They don't have advocates that we sometimes take for granted, right? Or others of us who are in the majority may take for granted. So these are some of the realities and challenges that I think any group may face, but for a woman of color is definitely a double whammy of gender bias and racial bias. So to that, that extra effort that a woman of color must exert causes all this mental stress. It takes a bigger toll. And it really detracts from what we can gain if she was able to be herself and just focus on work, right? So I think being intentional about supporting women of color simply levels the playing field and acknowledges that this group faces additional barriers differently from their peers.
Yeah, I like to talk about, when I talk about inclusion, that you have to be intentional, right? That if you don't intentionally include, you can unintentionally exclude. There's research out there that proves that the feeling of exclusion actually registers like physical pain in the brain. So if you're having to deal with that in your brain, just think of how much energy that takes and what it takes away from you being able to perform at your highest level in the workplace, right? So thank you for sharing that, Mimi. Alessandra.
Yeah, as a woman of color myself, right? I'm an immigrant, Latina. And while I started my career right at the top of the, kind of cream of the crop in telecom, when I came to the States, I was a single mom and I had to start all over again. I didn't have a network. I didn't have, anyone to vouch for me, et cetera, et cetera. So worked my way up from the sales floor to the boardroom. So I really relate with everything that Antonia and Mimi just said, right? And what you were mentioning. Now, to enact change, I think that we need the 3 Ps to be purposeful, plentiful, and practical, right? And we need to be guided by a vision for the desired outcome. So to your point and everyone's point, it needs to be purposeful, but it needs to come from the top. Change does not happen in an organization if it doesn't start from the top. There could be huge initiatives from the bottom up, but you need, right, the top of the organization to have that vision for change. As we say, we build our castle up in the clouds, but the foundation down on the ground. Then we identify the gaps and we kind of work our way up there, right? So what that really means is that we need to reshape corporate culture, because we could be talking diversity and inclusion all day long. We could be hiring all of these, different professionals that meet, right, the checks on that box. Hey, woman of color, this, and that, and the other. Unless the culture, the corporate culture, is prepared to welcome, right, to nurture, and to help propel forward, it's not going to happen. So how do you change corporate culture? Well, I'm sure it's not going to be a surprise to anybody here. The human being is typically on Wi-Fi mode, which means what's in it for I, what's in it for me. And so unless we are able to get buy-in from the organization, and not just educate, right? And just almost, speak to, as opposed to get buy-in of the organization, so that everybody understands what the win is for them, what the win is for, right, their team, and the overarching corporate goal. So defining that plan, getting team buy-in, and making everyone very much part of the process, and identifying what a win is for each and every different type of individual that comprises team, right? So once you have that plan devised, then you've got to be, you've got to have a megaphone. Communication is key, extraordinary communication. You've got to communicate. And there should be milestones that are celebrated. Hey, this is what we set out to do. This is the outcome that we are, that we desire. This is why we're doing it. And this is the first milestone met. So celebrating those milestones are key. And certainly, right, through the process, recognizing what's not working, right? Like any strategic plan, recognizing what's not working, but building momentum as we go. I'm in technology, and technologists always speak in acronyms. So I have an acronym for almost everything. So my favorite acronym is P square equals F square, which means pain of the past equals force of the future, right? So learning from our mistakes, learning from, right, and hearing, hey, Monica, what is it that you would like to see? What is that unknown? What makes you feel, and right, speak up. So it really becomes learning, putting to work all those invaluable lessons that we've learned in the past and turning those into, that magic gravy for that formula of success. And truthfully, it's getting people excited, getting people to buy in. But without corporate culture, you won't have a successful outcome.
Amen. Right. So you heard that saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast?
Right? Absolutely.
I use that all the time. And not only does it eat your strategy for breakfast, it'll eat your innovation and your transformation. Like, you have got to focus on culture. It's so important. That should be number one. Nupur, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I loved everything Alessandra said, and everybody. I really, the 3 P's, the practical got me, so if I could say, practically, if the top can demonstrate what are we doing to change or shift the culture, that is really powerful. So, practically we could, and we've tried this at our organization, and I think it's very powerful. Again, another P. Just getting the CEO or the C-suite to mentor, coach people who are different to themselves has been the challenge that was set out for our C-suite. It forced people to think out of the box and not go to, the people in their teams they were most comfortable with, and actually get to know, speak with, not just speak to, people who are different to them, and encourage them and understand their perspective and what may be needed to do. So in that program, we targeted specifically women of color to be mentored or coached, right? And talked about it. And I think it can go a long way. It encouraged, I think, the ERG to also voice what they wanted more from the C-suite, from senior leaders. It gives an avenue to have this discussion. In the other practical example that I could share with, let's say when we're doing succession planning for key roles in the organization, I think every organization does do that. Whether the organization believes in quotas or not, right? There's nothing stopping us from actually calibrating the data that, let's say there are 5 key roles that we're planning succession for. How many of these truly are women of color, or any other gender or a different minority group that we're talking about? And are those represented in the larger pool? And if they are, then why are they not represented in the potential successor pipeline? And what are we not doing, or what do we need to do differently to change this? So I think having that conversation and actually putting data in front of leaders can be very, very powerful. So those are just a couple of practical things that I think an organization could probably do to push this dialogue further and make meaningful change happen.
Thank you so much for that. And so that's going to get to our next topic, which is about allyship, mentorship, sponsorship, coaching. And I'm going to ask you all a question about this. But before we get to that, I want to just make sure that we're on the same page about what all those terms mean. For me, allyship is about using your position in the in group or the majority group, like your power, to help out, but understand, which means you have to learn about the challenges of that minority or that out group, and using your position to help, right? But helping when you're asked to help, not assuming that someone in that group needs the help. But number one, learning and understanding about that group so that you can use your position. Mentorship versus sponsorship, or coaching versus sponsoring. I've heard it described as mentoring or coaching is something that you do behind closed doors, right? Conversations that we have one-on-one about how you can get ahead in your career or challenges that you're facing. Sponsorship, and I think this is key in this gender conversation, I've heard defined as what happens when you're not in the room, right? Me using my position and my power to say, have we considered Mimi for that opportunity? Have we considered Antonia for that? I've seen Antonia and what she did on this other project, and I really think she can deliver, is putting my reputation on the line, using my power and my position to bring you along. I have had sponsors in my career. I know I have. I know that they were advocating for me when I was not in the room. That is a key difference. And you know what? In our organizations, it happens. And we know that men who are in positions of power, they're doing it, right? It's just who are they doing it for? So my question to you is, what success have you personally had or your company has had in the space of allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship? And I will start with you, Nupur.
Okay, thank you, Monica. So I'll probably answer the personal bit. So I think I said this at the beginning. When I moved to Australia, I was probably one of the only women of color in the team. I really struggled initially, no friends, no family, no real network of people that I could, probably seek support from. And since then, I've been really determined that somehow I find a way to help and support women of color. And obviously close to heart is the Indian subcontinent for me. That's where I'm from. So over the past 4 years, I have been very, very intentional about taking on at least 1 or 2 mentees every year. And I believe that, through conversations, through understanding their perspectives and what is going on in their careers as well as personal lives, I've been able to help influence some change. But more importantly, I think I've learned a lot about myself and from each of these amazing women that I've had the privilege to talk to and privilege to learn from, right? And how this has helped me, I think, in my career or from an organizational perspective is I can take that back into the organization or in my team and have those conversations about the barriers some of us face more openly and probably think through solutions in that scenario, because we're not alone in this. We've got to come together and try and solve this as much as possible together, right? So where it starts with 1 or 2 people, I think it can have a really big impact in time to come at a larger group level. So that's just been my personal experience with it.
Alessandra, you want to chime in?
I will. I'll love to chime in. I always have these little analogies because I'm a visual learner. And so I always say life is like a can of monkeys. And I'm going to totally date myself to all of you all that remember those little barrel of monkeys that were like plaid and plasticky that had like one hand up and one hand down. You could make a little chain, right? And for me, that's a visual of how life works. Everyone needs, right, a leg up at some point in life, and you need help to get ahead. And at some point, you're in a position to help others, right? You got to help yourself first so that you can be in a position to help others. That is a key lesson in life. But this is not the exception, right? So I think that, from a perspective of allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship, I've been very lucky that when I landed in California and I had to, start from the ground up again, I was fairly vocal about asking for help, but it had taken me years to develop this skill set because we are just by nature not really good about asking for help because women, we multitask, we got everything under control. And when no one knows the answer, we may not even know the answer, but we're going to dive head first, right, to solve a problem. And so we're not very used to asking for help. So when we think about allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship, I think that where it starts, right, we have to start with our the purposeful intent that we have to be helped, to be included, right? To be considered, to be, right, thought about. And in order to do that, you have to learn how to be vocal about it. And that is a skill, right, that I have worked many years with many of the women that I've had the privilege to mentor through the years in developing. But in the end, I don't believe that we can have true gender equality without men supporting us. So it even becomes more important for us to be well articulated about our goals and our vision for our personal, professional, and financial success so we can thrive, right? That's the quadrant. We've got to be in a good place personally, professionally, financially, so that we can thrive. And we need to identify our own goals for ourselves and our own vision for success. And then we have to be good about articulating those to that are in a position to help us, because guess what? Also, the human nature is to want to help. And I will say that it was very much to my surprise that when I started to ask for help of men leaders, men in better positions than mine, they would actually help. They would stop and they would help. I don't have a single example where I came to a VP, right? A regional VP of, market, whatever. And I said, look, I really believe that I'm qualified, right, to take on this territory, but I don't know how to put my name in the hat. I don't know who I need to be talking to. Help me find the path to get me there. But I was very clear about the destination and the outcome that I wanted. So in order for women, right, to kind of get in and climb that executive ladder, I think it also behooves us to identify those men that are in positions or that may be in positions to help guide us get there. And we have to be vocal about it in order to get them to either sponsor us, which in my experience have been men that took a chance, promoted me, and helped me succeed, even though I may have not been the candidate with the better credentials or the most experience, or right? So they literally promoted me and they helped guide me to success. So that's kind of my feedback.
100% agree. And then when we get there, make sure we sponsor other women. My
That's
experience,
right. That's paying it forward, right?
Right. My
That's the
experience,
monkey. That's the barrel of monkeys, right?
That's right. My experience is that those that sponsored me, many were women, right? And so I owe it that when I'm here now to sponsor other women and help them move forward. Antonia, did you have something you wanted to add to this discussion?
My favorite visual of today, and what I will take with me, is the barrel of monkeys. I saw a picture once of a girl that was like reaching up and reaching down.
And that's a visual I've always had too, of, okay, when I get up there, when I'm climbing up there, I need to make sure that I'm bringing people up with me. And so I love that visual, and I love the barrel of monkeys. I'm dating myself too. But I've had some personal successes in this area too. I've been sponsored by both male and females. And I will say that I also believe that it's my duty to pay that forward and to mentor others. And I've mentored both males and females and sponsored both males and females. But, I think you said something in the beginning, Monica, about allyship. And I'm going to be really, really vulnerable right now. That is an area that I have to learn more about. My personal self, I've mentored women of color and didn't necessarily ask permission to help them. And you said that in the beginning when you defined that allyship and that sponsorship and that mentorship. And that was a huge learning for me, right? To not just assume that this person wanted help, but to wait, because there's some dignity there, right? There's a dignity to saying, actually, can you help me with this? Or don't just assume that I need help, right? And so I have learned, like Nupur has mentioned, so much from the people that I've mentored. They have taught me life lessons that I will forever carry. And, and I do believe that it's important that we share those messages and share those experiences and support one another 100%. So thank you for mentioning that, Monica, because I think that's
sure
important.
I see Sherry's back, but Mimi, I see you went off mute. So I think you want to chime in.
Yeah, I want to offer a slightly different point of view from what you were talking about, Antonia and Monica. I would say, yes, definitely allyship is about asking and understanding and learning first, right? But I will add to that, folks who need help don't always know exactly what's needed. So yes, you ask, but you ensure that you empower them to ask for help, right? As Alessandra, you said that earlier, we don't always go and ask. So the person that you are trying to help, definitely create the environment, push them a little bit. I think that's important. But my one thing on sponsorship is just, all that is good, but you have to take that back to succession planning. And until you take that into the conversation about career development and sponsor and who is actually going to get that opportunity and take that into that succession planning conversation, we're back in this 100 years from now, and we're still talking about, yes, it's important to, be allies and do this all the time in culture. But until those numbers start to change and we take these into those conversations and actually give women, deserving women, an opportunity to really shine and pull, everyone else up along with them, nothing will change.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll just say, I know we're coming to an end. Sherry's going to come on and bring some questions for the audience. My only regret about us not being in person is that we can't all go out and finish this conversation around a meal. Thank you for allowing me to moderate the panel. I'll end with one of my favorite quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was once asked, how many women on the Supreme Court is enough? And she said 9, right?
Yes.
Love that. All right, Sherry, I'm turning it over to you and I'm going on mute.
Oh my gosh. My head has just been like, yes. Oh yeah, there's so many brilliant gems. I'm just filled. Thank you so much. I love the passion. I love the insights. I love the quality. I love the depth and the breadth of all of the answers to these really big questions. I mean, we did not softball this. We really put some sticky questions in there for you, and you all handled them so brilliantly. And I'm just so grateful. And Monica, I love how you just get in there and make sure that you add your own flips, because there's so many just amazing things that we covered today, and it's a very broad topic, and I'm grateful to you all. I know how we're all incredibly busy, and just the fact that you all showed up and you spent your time and you shared and you were here and present, it was just absolutely fabulous, and I cannot thank you enough. But I want to move on to our Q&A, because we did have several questions, and it looks like the top voted question is, how do you measure inclusion? A lot of you are in the DEI space and practitioners, and so you may have some practical ways for doing that. So Julia Geisman is asking, how do you measure inclusion? Does anybody have a practical response to that you typically would do if in your organization, Monica?
Mimi, did you want to go?
Go ahead, Monica.
Okay.
You're ready.
So we use surveys, right? We use surveys and we ask people how they feel about where they work, how they experience the workplace. But more importantly, you have to make sure that you look at the different demographic groups, right? Are women experiencing the workplace similar to men, right? We just recently did it. We're very upfront about it. There's a gap between how women feel about certain things and how men feel about certain things. So we tackle that. We look at that gap. We put initiatives in place to make sure we can remove that gap. We also, attrition, right? People don't leave places where they feel included and loved, right? And respected. So we know some people will move on for other employment opportunities, but hopefully we can give them those opportunities in their career where we are. So through attrition and through our survey data to make sure people feel as though they belong. So those are just 2 things that we do.
Yeah, great. Mimi, I know that you're a data person. So how do you measure inclusion?
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Very similar to you. I think number 1 is your employee engagement survey. If you're not doing it, definitely do it. If you are doing it, make sure there are diversity and inclusion questions in there. And I think how you ask the questions is also really important. I know, when we were designing these diversity and inclusion questions, you want to ask in such a way that really gets not just, do you feel included enough, right? But get at some, and I'd be happy to provide some examples we've come across that also have some benchmarking data around it. That is the one. And then, like Monica said, overlay that with all the dimensions of diversity. And I can tell you of all the places I've worked and looked at diversity and inclusion data from other companies as well, our Black and Brown women of color, Black and Brown colleagues in particular, are probably the lowest in terms of sense of belonging. And this is based on benchmark that I've seen, right? And of course, your white male feel the most included, but I wouldn't just lay gender, I would now overlay race. And if you have an opportunity to look at other dimensions, be it, sexual orientation or disability, all of that's really important, because then you can go make informed decisions about how to really create inclusions for those particular groups. And then the workaround that, or not the workaround, but the solution to that, and also another gauge of it would be your ERGs, right? I haven't been a Thermo Fisher for that long, but I will say I'm extremely impressed with the 10 ERGs and some 200 chapters around the world. So the company has really put a huge focus around ERGs. And I would measure attrition, development, success pathways for those ERG members to say, does being in an ERG or any diversity council or having engagement within the company get you XYZ? I think that's another way to look at whether or not inclusion is truly happening, and how it translates into success.
Mm-hmm. Very, very, yeah, I love that. Anyone else have any handy measurement for inclusion in their organization? Yeah, it really does have to do with your specific organization to gather, from what's actually happening, because it's just such a diverse, broad organizations out there that you have to be able to start with where you are. I love that. The next question, Myrna is asking, how do we get our companies or organizations to support the family structure with things like childcare? Alessandra, I know that this is right down your alley. Do you want to take a stab at that for us?
Absolutely. I think that we need, employers and the business community at large has to recognize that our new reality is ever changing, and that it revolves around the family unit. And in order to do that, I think that employers through COVID experienced great loss of productivities due to all of the issues surrounding primarily childcare, but not only childcare, right? There's a sandwich generation, right, of parents that are not only taking care of their little ones, but they're also taking care of their parents, right? Or an ill neighbor, or right. So I feel that in order to truly kind of reset, we have to, as employers and executives, we have to place a tremendous amount of value in family support services as an integral part of the benefits that help us attract talent, retain talent, promote talent, right? And we spoke about this slightly at the beginning of the conversation, top of the conversation, especially women who have been disproportionately impacted by this topic. So it's when I kind of was coming up the ropes in telecom and technology, the big benefit was either to have a game room or the big, gym on site, or, the volleyball court, or, the beer fest on Fridays, and anything to keep the employer on premise for a longer amount of time, right? These huge campuses, right? That do that. And I think that's all well and dandy, but priorities have changed. And if we think about the upcoming workforce, if we're thinking about the millennials and the Gen Zs of the world that will ultimately, over the course of the next 5 years, make up at least 30 to 40% of our workforce, they have completely different sense of priorities. And so for them, purpose is really important, but work-home balance is key. And they will not they will not work for a company that A, doesn't value family, and B, that doesn't provide them with the benefits necessary for them to thrive personally, professionally, and financially. Again, life is that quadrant: personal, professional, financial equals thriving. And so as employers, I think we really need to reset our benefits, and certainly FMLA and, the flexibility of working from home, but truly it all stems in, right, family support services. And clearly this is very close to my heart.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Nupur, I'm curious about, because you are not only not, as you pointed out, not in America or in the Western culture, but also you have overseen a global, workforce. So how do you balance this? Because in the West, we do tend to have busyness as a badge of honor. And if you're not, there and fighting right next to them, everyone else?
I think busyness is a badge of honor everywhere, actually. Um, in terms of family support, it's a really good question. All the things that Alexandra suggested are not always possible sometimes to do in every country. So one's got to understand, I think, in the country's context, in that cultural context, what actually happens in the environment back home, in a way. Because in some Asian countries, for example, there is domestic help, etc. In some there isn't. In some, you get help or family care or child care at very exorbitant rates where sometimes it's subsidized. So I think the solution has to be quite attuned to which particular part of the world you're working the solution for, right? And in it, I think it's important to understand also, what do women really want from a family support perspective? Is it just about childcare support, or is it about they truly want flexible hours? Is it the ability to be able to do part-time jobs, etc.? The openness and acceptance of that. So I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution, typically, and one's got to kind of tailor it to what is happening with that group or in that particular environment. So so one's got to really be listening and understanding what the needs on the ground are, and come up with the solution. So in our US context, for example, we have partnered with organizations that would, especially during the pandemic, help provide emergency childcare. Let's say one has to be in a meeting, one needs support, their partner's not around either to help, etc. So, at a subsidized rate, how do you partner with such an agency or an organization which will help you help the individual get through it? So that's a benefit that is provided, right? Whereas in another part of the world, it may look like it's not about wanting family daycare, childcare type of support, but the ability to work on the weekend versus a weekday, and it's still being okay, because that's just how the setup is in their own context. So just kind of working through multiple solutions.
I think it's like the inclusion question. You don't slap on an off-the-shelf answer and call it good. Check, we check the box, but find the data, survey, what people do really want. That makes sense. Anybody else want to jump in on the supporting family? I also like I think it was Mimi who brought up, it's not necessarily maternity leave, but it's parental leave, and thinking about those more traditional roles about, what is childcare, who's responsible for childcare. Arthur Benjamin is asking, what does male allyship look like for the female professional? Antonia, you have a smile on your face. Do you want to take a stab?
I have a smile because I feel like all my life I had male allies. So that's why I'm smiling.
Mm-hmm.
And and this is something that we haven't talked about in this discussion, but in the trajectory of my career, I feel like I've had a lot of support from males and sometimes jealousy maybe of females. And so it's been kind of interesting to see that. But for me, the males that have been in my life have been very helpful, very supportive, given me good advice and good direction. Definitely not overbearing, but there for me when I needed to ask them questions, but didn't try to make decisions for me, but would give me the guidance. And this is don't take this the wrong way, but sometimes men are fixers, right? And so when we come to them with a question or a problem, they just want to fix it and solve for us. And I don't think that that's necessarily always the best thing to do for women as we're moving up in our career. I think we need to solve for ourselves. And I think what we need is good advice and good guidance, but at the end of the day, we need to come up with the answer and we need to solve and not have somebody come in and rescue and fix it for us. So that's important for male allies to remember, that they don't need to come in, rescue, fix, and save, but instead give us that, that support and guidance that we're seeking.
Yeah.
So I'll chime in here a little bit. I think it's important, and I can't remember who said it earlier. It may have been Mimi or Nupur, that, men modeling this behavior of work-life balance, I think is critical, right? So if you're in a position where you have women subordinates, being upfront and intentional about sharing, I'm leaving early because I have to go to my child's baseball game, or I'm taking off tomorrow because I have to take my daughter to the dentist, right? The more you model that, it lets not just your female subordinates, but your male subordinates know it's okay to do this, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, be aware of what's happening in the work environment. We all know, we've seen this happen in meetings where women get interrupted, cut off.
That's what she said.
Right, we get mansplained, right? So be aware of that stuff happening in a meeting and say something about it, right? Say, well, wait a minute, I just heard Sherry talking and I don't know if she got a chance to finish. Can we go back to the point that she was making? Use your position of privilege. And I know we don't like that word. We don't like the word privilege, but we all have privilege. I have privilege. I have privilege, okay? We all have some sort of privilege. And I like to describe privilege as, if you don't have to think about it, it's a privilege, right? So I like to use the example of being a right-handed person, right? I have right-handed privilege. I don't have to go through the world thinking about what it's like to operate the world from a left hand, right? I love that example because it's not offensive. People don't get offended by it, right? So if you don't have to think about it's like for a woman to think, should I make this point? If they interrupt me, then you have the privilege. So use your privilege to call that kind of behavior out. Or I like to say, call it in. Maybe you don't have the courage to call it out when it happens, but call somebody in later and say, I noticed that you interrupted Alessandra in that conversation. Maybe we should think about when somebody's making a point, and you don't have to say, maybe it was because she was a woman, just say, I noticed you interrupted her, right? So using your position and your privilege to call out that kind of behavior is another thing that you can help to be an ally.
And can I just chime in here to say that we have to help men be better allies because they just don't know what they don't know until they know. And so the reality of it is that for them to be good allies of us, it's not only letting us speak, right, or giving us the opportunity to speak first or any of that. It's also active listening, and active listening means that we should take responsibility as well to convey what we need, want, right, and what we find disrespectful or overbearing. And I can say that in technology, predominantly it's male. Okay, so I've been in too many conference rooms and meetings as a single female while everyone's male, and when I felt disrespected, I wait for a good time post that meeting, and I do take ownership and responsibility to set that person apart and express my my concerns or my feelings. And again, right, I think that we need to take responsibility as well to help shape, right, that culture and that mind shift in our allies. So again, I can't speak enough about being vocal and about being purposeful, and we can't just sit there and expect things to happen for us, because it's not going to work.
Mind readers.
We have to take an active role in the change and in helping to shape those allies and sponsors.
Absolutely. Pointed out. Yeah, Nupur.
I so agree with everything that's been said. But if I may also say, I think it starts at home as well. I have needed my partner, who's male, to be an ally all along. And on occasion, I've had to really say what I need from him. And even with my own mentees or people I've just worked with women, encouraging them to have that open conversation with their partner. What does support look like for them to advance in their careers, in their workplace? What do they need back at home, right? I think it's an important conversation to be had. It starts at home to a large degree. And for those of who have, you know, brothers, sons, it's a really good way to probably influence and help how to get them to be better allies at work or in their relationships. So I think there's loads of opportunity where we see it every day and how we can influence it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, Art, go ahead, Mimi.
I was gonna say, I think this one struck a chord with all of us, but I love how Nupur is taking it back to the home, because that's where I was going. I heard this really, really good article on NPR once before. It starts so young. After all, this session is all about how do we change the history or HERstory, right, of the future. And it starts with gender roles. And Art, you of all people know this because our dear friend Art is the primary caretaker for his daughter, I believe so. But challenging all that, I'd like it to, even at home, and I come from, like I said, a very traditional Chinese family, right? Guess who's being asked to clean at home? The girls. Why aren't the boys clean? The boys' rooms are dirty. Boys are boys. The girls, clean up your room, be a lady. Like all those things that put stress on females and women to have to feel like they're going to be the caretaker of the future. That does something to the psyche of children even. And on the flip side of that, the other side of this is the education piece, right? And I know this, again, being Asian, I know from my colleagues who are of Hispanic culture, Latina, that a lot of times if they're accepted into school, but if the family can't afford it, they're the first ones to be asked to give up on their education, come home and help the family. And I don't need to speak for all of them, but these are from my experiences and colleagues that I've seen and young girls that I've seen in the community. It says, I got into college, but I've been told I need to come home and work. Right? I need to come home and help the families first. Those are the norms we have to shed. This is not only, I think, culture at work, but culture in society. And until we change these norms, and I love there's a question about binary, but even get out of our binary mode of who should do what role, I don't think we can change the workplace. So thank you, Nupur, for taking this back to everything at home.
Mm-hmm. I so agree with that. I know this brought up for me, my husband is a CEO, and they're like a turnaround CEO, and so he's constantly just every day, like 34, 92, black, white. And so I'll often say, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going to buy milk. I don't need a decision from you. I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. I don't need you to CEO this. I'm just telling you where I'm going. I don't need to be asked whether or not we need milk. I've already ascertained that we're low on milk. I'm just going to the store. But yeah, you kind of have to prime sometime. And also as a mother too, model that mom needs her space. You know, mom is not on 24/7 anymore. You're old enough to, pour your own cereal and put it away and clean it. And so also modeling that too, I think is just so, so important. I love where you brought that. Well, I think that wraps it up. We do always have more questions than we have time for answers, but gosh, thank you so much again for being here. And I would love to be able to turn it over now to Danielle August, who is really the person she's the magic behind all of this. So thank you, Danielle, personally from me, for setting all this up. You just make everybody feel so welcome and comfortable and prepared, and you take care of all the logistics and a toddler at home. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sherry. And I want to thank our amazing panelists and moderator for their wisdom and vulnerability really today. And prioritizing this conversation as an executive leader in charge of many moving pieces at work and at home is truly admirable. So thank you. And thank you to our audience, those that are still around, for being here with us today and for your thoughtful questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of your questions, but we have taken note of them all, and hopefully we can find a way to repurpose those in our group discussion on LinkedIn. I want to also thank our outstanding champion sponsors, Tenuity and California Coast Credit Union. They were talked about in the beginning of our program. I want to thank them for their support and commitment to advancing women in the workplace and closing the gender gap. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate your support. As a reminder, today's panel was recorded, and you will all receive a copy of that recording along with the chat log by the end of this week via email. And even those that signed up and couldn't make it today for unforeseen reasons, they'll also receive a link to the recording. I'm going to go ahead and just pull up a quick slide real fast. If I have it, which is, I don't. I don't know where it went, so I'm just going to talk about it. We want you to join us for our last D&I discussion of 2021 that will take place on October 27th. It's called D&I in Action and Building a 2022 Roadmap. We just secured the speaker for this, and we're excited to make that announcement soon. We're just buttoning up some details. But please register for this free event if you're interested in building out a 2022 roadmap that incorporates D&I into your strategy. I think this would be a great event for you to attend. And Sherry is going to provide a link to register in the chat so that you can be sure to join us. This is going to be the last one of the year, and then we're going to be actually kicking off a 2022 season that we're really excited about. So we'll give you the details of all of what we have planned for 2022. With that, we hope you all have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you find yourselves. Just be well, and thank you for being here. And thank you again, panelists and Monica, for moderating. You guys are great. You ladies are wonderful.
You're still
Thank you
with
for the
us. Unmute
opportunity.
yourself. Yes.
Thank
Unmute yourself.
you.
Say thank you. Thank